Okay, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome you to tonight's webinar. My name is Warwick Tullio. I'm the Senior Projects Officer of the Sustainability Team at Wyndham City Council. I'll be your MC for tonight's session. As tonight's host, I would like to respectfully acknowledge that Wyndham City Council recognises Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first peoples of Australia. We acknowledge the Bunurong and Wadawurrung peoples as the traditional owners of the lands on which Wyndham City operates. The Wadawurrung and Bunurong peoples have and always will belong to the Werribee Yaluk, or river, creeks, stars, hills, and red clay of this country. We pay respects to their ancestors and elders who always have and always will care for country and community today and for future generations. As we're meeting online this evening, I'd like to extend my gratitude and respect to all First Nations peoples that may be watching this event. Okay, the topic for this session this evening is all electric homes. And based on the fact that we had over 100 registrations for tonight's webinar, which is fantastic, by the way, I know a lot of people are interested in this topic. Whether it's to seek ways to transition away from gas and cut our reliance on fossil fuels, reduce our energy bills, or look for ways to become more environmentally friendly, I'm sure there'll be some valuable insights we can all take away. It's a perfect time to take steps towards making your home and lifestyle more sustainable. One of the most difficult things for a lot of people, however, is to find trusted and independent advice to help us on our journey. To help with this, the Western Alliance for Greenhouse Action Group of City Councils has come together to bring you a series of online events from the sustainability and energy experts at Renew. We've been providing independent and trusted advice now for over 40 years. On behalf of the WAGA councils, which include Brimbank, Maribyrnong, Melton, Moonee Valley, Hobsons Bay, and Wyndham City Council, I'd like to thank you for your attendance tonight. I'd also like to highlight this is the second webinar in the series. Some of the other upcoming webinars will discuss topics such as energy in the community, energy efficiency, electric vehicles, and solar and batteries. Please check your local council web pages for what's on and when. All recordings of past webinars will also be made available if you're unable to attend any of these sessions. You can watch these at a time that suits you. So on that note, I would like to let you know that tonight's webinar is being recorded. Only the audio and video content from speakers will be made available after the event. So please don't fear and feel free to participate by posting any comments and questions using the text-based chat and Q&A functions. Depending on time, all questions will try to be answered at the end of tonight's presentation by our expert. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the webinar functions, the chat function on the bottom left-hand side of your screen, just click the icon to use the chat. This is a place where you can discuss amongst yourself during the presentation. The Q&A functions on the bottom right-hand side of the screen. Similarly, click on the icon to open the window, type in your question and press enter. And you can also upvote others' questions by pressing the thumbs up icons. If you have some questions that you'd like to have answered, make sure you put them in the Q&A function, and we'll circle back to this. The raise hand is in the middle of the bottom bar, but only use this to indicate if you need assistance from our technical support team. I would now like to introduce you to tonight's expert speaker from Renew, Dean Lombard. Dean's an energy specialist who's worked on issues such as energy efficiency, fuel choice, consumer protections, hardship assistance, and community energy projects. He's interested in helping people and communities take control of their energy needs and make the system work for them. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Dean for tonight's presentation.
Thanks very much, Warwick, for having us, and thanks everyone for coming to this session. I'm just going to get my slides started, and while I'm doing that, I'll let you know about Renew, which is presenting these, puts these webinars together. I'm doing this for Renew. Renew is a community-based organisation Yeah, been around for 40 years, as Warwick mentioned. That's all focused on helping people live sustainably in their homes and in their communities. They publish magazines about renewable energy technology, new energy technology, and also about sustainable house design. Lots of other stuff. Check out the Renew website at renew.org.au to find out more about Renew. In tonight's session, I was going to give a bit of a overview and discussion about all electric homes in sort of 5 sort of sections, basically the history and the future of all electric homes. And then 2 important things about the difference between all electric homes and dual fuel homes, which are homes that have gas and electric appliances, like the cost difference and the difference in carbon emissions. We'll talk a bit about the appliances that you'd use in an all electric home and sort of how they might be different from gas appliances. And then we'll give some tips about if you want to go all electric or move towards being more electric in your home, some tips on that for how to best do that. And yeah, as I mentioned, if you've got questions, whack them in the Q&A and we'll get through as many as we can at the end of the session. So one of the first things about electric homes is that they're not new, they're actually old. Before the 1950s, people used heating oil, kerosene, coal gas, firewood briquettes for their energy needs, for lighting, for cooking, heating, etc. And the 1950s, but by the 1950s, sort of most urban areas were electrified in Victoria. And, you know, new electric appliances were cleaner and relatively cheap and very cheap to run because electricity was really cheap because the coal that was used to make it was like super cheap to dig up. And the whole electricity industry was set up by the government, paid for through, you know, tax revenue. So it was cheap and it was clean, and it was a big change for people in the 1950s through to about the 1970s. The all electric home was pretty much the norm. That sort of started to change in the 70s when gas was suddenly more available, especially piped gas that was piped directly to homes in Melbourne and then later in other cities and towns in Victoria. And gas was really cheap from the 70s to the 2010s. And that was really appealing. And gas appliances, you know, people like it was so much cheaper to heat your house with gas. It was so much cheaper to cook, and gas cooking was way more sort of flexible and nuanced than cooking on those old electric sort of stoves. So electricity became very popular. And there was a massive government support program to help people transition into gas appliances. The whole city and many country towns were piped up. Whole house ducted heating started to become more and more common until by the sort of 90s, it was pretty much the default for most houses, very much in Melbourne and Geelong. And also a few other places in other parts of Australia, like Canberra in particular, has a lot of ducted gas heating, and some parts of New South Wales. Ducted gas heating burns a heap of gas, as you would know if you had it. But when gas was really cheap, that didn't really matter. And gas was so popular that a massive bottled gas industry also took off. In a lot of country towns where you couldn't get natural gas, people would get LPG gas bottles to use to run heating and cooking. And a good thing to note also is that natural gas is not necessarily natural. It's dug up out of the ground. It's actually methane, and it's just called natural gas because that was a good marketing term. The story of why gas suddenly appeared and became cheap is basically that oil drilling started in the Bass Strait in the 1960s. And methane was basically a byproduct of drilling for oil. And the pipelines were built in order to make some money off this otherwise waste product from the oil industry. And that was why it was all built, and that's why it was so cheap. But now the oil wells are pretty much dried up in Bass Strait, and gas, as you've probably noticed, is no longer very cheap. In fact, it's gotten very expensive, and is getting more so with like the impacts of the war in Europe and everything. So as the options for fuel change in homes, the types of appliances that homes could buy as well change. So you probably, some people are familiar with these old style electric appliances, like your stove with the like resistive electric elements that, take a while to heat up and then take a while to cool down. You've got to get the knack of how to cook with those, and we don't really like them very much in Melbourne, do we? We like our gas cookers, electric hot water systems, using again a resistive element, same as these electric radiators, a resistive element. The resistive element basically means the electricity goes through a wire. It's got a lot of resistance. It heats up the wire. That's how you get the heat. That's the basic for a whole lot of these old school electric appliances. You know, once gas became the main fuel for cooking, heating, and hot water, we started to get gas stoves and gas hot water systems, which, you know, at first were pretty similar to electric, but they just were fired by gas. But now more common are the instantaneous gas water heaters that just heat the water as it's going through the pipes to come out the tap. And of course, gas heaters. And, you know, we used to have these wall furnaces or console heaters, and now we're more likely to have ducted heating. But there's new electric technologies that weren't available in the 60s, and it's really based around the heat pump. The heat pump is really the same principle as a fridge, but it's sort of in reverse. It uses ambient heat from the air to make heat. And you've all seen what you know, reverse cycle air conditioners, often called split systems, that cool and heat. They use this heat pump to do that, and that they heat, you know, that in 2023, this is a more sort of contemporary sort of heating appliance, is a reverse cycle air conditioner or a heat pump heater of some kind. You also have heat pump hot water systems, which use the same principle of a heat pump to heat the water instead of, you know, resistive electric wire. And then we have induction cooktops, which sometimes look pretty similar to some of the more modern resistive cooktops, but the induction works on a completely different principle. And we'll talk about that a bit more down the track. So the heat pump is the big deal in these new types of appliances. And here's a little explanation of how it works. Basically, the box that's outside the house, it might be on the ground or it might be up on the roof. It's sometimes called a compressor. It's actually, that is sort of the heat pump. It's got a compressor, it's got heat exchange, it's got all these parts to it. And basically it sucks in air from outside, and then it sucks all the heat out of the air and then spits out the really cold air without the heat out the other side. And you might not think there's that much heat in air, especially on a cold day, but even cold air still has quite a bit of heat in it, because we think of heat as it's hot, but heat is actually just a quality of a gas or of a solid, or I'm not a physicist, so I'm explaining this wrong, but, you know, heat is in nearly everything. If something's really cold, like the thing with no heat in it at all is at minus 273 degrees Celsius. That's when there's no heat in the thing. As long as something is not as cold as that, it's got some heat in it. And that's what the heat pump does. It sucks the heat out of the air. And this box is operated by electricity. And then it basically spits the heat into the device that then heats your house through the stuff that's in here. There's a heat exchanger in there and a heat exchanger in there, and they use refrigerant liquid, which you might be familiar with if you've had to get your car air conditioning fixed. Refrigerant liquid is used to transfer the heat, to take the heat out or put the heat in. And the real genius of these heat pumps, the thing that makes them so efficient, is that you're not using the electricity to create the heat. You're just using the electricity to operate the machine that takes the heat out of the air. And that's why if you put in 1 unit of electricity into this box, you get about 5 units of heat energy out the other side. So you're multiplying the energy by 5 times, which seems like it's against the law of physics, but it's because there's this other input, the heat that's in the air. And that's very different to those resistive elements where, you know, the unit of energy of electricity that goes in is a unit of heat that comes out. Heat pump hot water systems work exactly the same way. Get the heat out of the air, spit the heat into the tank. And you know, and if you run a heat pump backwards, you get cold instead of heat. That's how the air conditioner makes cooling. And that's also how your fridge works. It uses the exact same principle. This is built into the fridge. It takes the heat out and makes the stuff cold. So that's the heart of these efficient appliances. And the reason that we talk so much about heating and hot water is because by far they're the 2 biggest energy users in our homes. This is probably a few years old, and look, it varies a lot with different houses and it depends on lots of things. But on average, you know, almost half the energy used in a home is used for heating in Melbourne. And 20 to 30% is used for hot water, and everything else is the rest. You know, you can see here, cooking, not really very much. You know, lights, hardly anything at all. Fridge, if your fridge isn't too inefficient, also not much. So there's two reasons why we talk about these appliances when we're talking about all electric homes. And one is because of this, that they're the biggest energy used in homes. And the other is because these are the things that can be operated by either gas or electricity. Most of these other things, excuse me, you know, so we've got hot water, heating, and the cooktop. Pretty much everything else is usually only done by electricity. So that's why these are the important things when we're talking about all electric homes. So why you would want to go all electric, there's sort of two main things. It's what does it cost you, and it's how much carbon emissions does it make. Now at Renew, we've done a lot of research on this area, and we use a very sophisticated model to simulate household energy consumption with different appliances. And our last big report on this was from 2018, where we looked at all around Australia, and we looked at different size houses, and we looked at, you know, here's a house with a typical dual fuel setup of, you know, gas hot water, gas heating, and gas cooking. And here's the exact same house with electric, all of those things with efficient appliances. What's the different cost? And the modeling was based on one of those appliances breaks down or has to be replaced, right? You need a new heater or you need a new hot water system. So what happens if instead of replacing your heater with another gas heater, you put in reverse cycle air conditioning instead? So we're looking at the capital costs, the cost to buy and have the appliance installed, the cost to maintain it over its life, and the cost of the electricity or gas to run it. And we compare all these different scenarios against each other. And basically what we find is that, you know, back in 2018, the efficient electric appliances usually cost a little bit more upfront than the equivalent gas appliances. That's sort of changed in the last few years. The cost difference, you know, with especially reverse cycle air conditioners, they've come down a lot in price, and they're much more equivalent now to gas ones. The heat pump hot water system still costs a bit more, but they tend to, you know, even in 2018, like it costs a bit more, but the lower energy bills over the lifetime of it more than make up for the extra cost and lead you to a saving. And that saving is particularly driven by heating. We use a lot of heating in Victoria. And, you know, if you replace ducted heating with a few reverse cycle air conditioners, you pay it back in a few years and then you're ahead for the rest of the time. So we looked at all these differences, and the other thing is that even just having the two connections, an electricity connection and a gas connection, you'll notice that each one has a fixed charge, like a daily charge or service charge, as well as the energy usage charge. If you get rid of that gas connection and just have one utility connection, you actually also avoid paying that service fee every day of every year for that gas connection, which is about $300 a year. So that's a big saving, irrespective of the amount of energy that you use. And look, we've done this study a few times. This is the most recent one. It's a big job that we need to get a bunch of funding to do. But we did do a more recent study on a bit of a smaller scope last year, because you'd be aware that we've had a bit of an energy crisis, and energy prices have gone up and are going to go up for the next few years. So we did a smaller study just looking at running costs, factoring in the rising energy prices over the next few years. And that modeling basically found similar sort of thing, that, you know, everybody's prices are going up, but dual fuel homes prices are going up faster and will go up higher than all electric homes. And people who are all electric and have solar will have the lowest price increases. They'll still have price increase because prices are all going up, but they'll have the lowest. And it also shows, because this study also looked at the examples we use of like a typical existing home and a typical new home. And the difference between them is the thermal performance, which is, you know, the insulation, the draft proofing, because new homes have to meet a higher standard. And this study also showed, again, which we've done in several studies, that if you improve thermal efficiency by, you know, making sure you've got the right insulation, making sure you've got draft proofing and having good window coverings, you also save a lot of money because you save so much energy usage. Now, in our view, and in a lot of people's views, there's a lot going for, you know, getting rid of gas and going all electric in terms of cost. And obviously the gas industry is not crazy about that idea because, that they see, that's a bit of an existential crisis for them. And they'll often say how, well, gas is actually cheaper than electricity, and they'll question the sort of modeling that we do. And so I'm going to run through the cost thing because it can be a bit confusing, because if you look at your bills, you'll see that, and this is current prices, gas is about 3.4 cents a unit and electricity is like 23 cents a unit. That's a big difference. Gas is looking a lot cheaper than electricity there. But if you look closer, you'll see they're different units, because gas is measured in megajoules and electricity is measured in kilowatt hours. And if you're going to compare the prices, you need to compare them in the same units, right? And there's 3.6 megajoules in a kilowatt hour. So gas is actually 3.6 times more than the price that it says there to be in the equivalent units. So if you look at them both in the same units, kilowatt hours, you'll see that gas is actually about 12 cents a kilowatt hour and electricity is about 23 cents. Gas is still like about around half the price. So that does seem to back up the gas industry's claims that gas is much cheaper than electricity. And that's normally the figure that they use. Gas is half the price of electricity in the same units. But there's one other factor that they sometimes conveniently forget, which is that it really depends on what you're using it for. And if you remember from a few slides ago about how the heat pumps are much more efficient in their use of the energy than other electric appliances and other appliances, that's actually the trick, because a gas ducted heating system is about 80% efficient. That means that for every unit of gas that goes in, so say for every 100 units of gas that goes in, 80% comes out as heating in the room, and about 20% is lost. Some is lost through the ducts, some is lost just through the process of combustion. And that's an average. A brand new system might be a bit more efficient. An old system could be a hell of a lot less, can be like 50% if there's holes in the ducts or that. So it does vary a lot. Reverse cycle air conditioners, 450% efficient or often more. And remember, that means you get more out than you put in, because if you remember, we put a bit of electricity in to suck all this heat out of the air, and then that's the heat that goes out. So reverse cycle air conditioners are many times more efficient than gas ducted heating. If you look at it in terms of energy in to electric, fuel energy in to heat energy out. So if you factor in the efficiency, gas ends up sort of 2.5 times more expensive than electricity. If you look at the cost per energy output of the heating device, and it's a pretty similar story for hot water. Instantaneous hot water systems are very efficient, 90%. It's pretty good. Heat pump hot water systems also about 450% efficient. So again, when you look at fuel cost in to heat energy out, gas is about twice as expensive. And this is the secret of, this is the mystery of why these heat pump appliances are so much cheaper to run than gas appliances, and indeed than the older style electrical appliances that use resistive elements. Now, that report I showed you, that orange one, has lots of very detailed modeling in it. We looked at a whole lot of different appliance replacement scenarios, and the sort of take-home message from it, really, the summary is replacing gas ducted heating with a few reverse cycle air conditioners, sort of arranged around the house to get the equivalent sort of heat. Costs a little bit more, maybe, but will save so much money that it pays back any difference in a year or two, and then you're basically spending less. Hot water, when we did this study in 2018, it was sort of break even, because the heat pump hot water systems are quite a bit more expensive than the gas ones, but they cost less to run, and you sort of break even over the life of the appliance, which was, I think it was 10 years. Of course, they sometimes last longer. Heat pump hot water systems are a bit cheaper now, so that's probably a bit ahead. Cooktop, replacing a gas cooktop with induction. The inductions tend to cost a bit more, but they've also come down a bit. They cost about the same to run. So that's also a bit of a sort of break-even sort of thing. Though, as I said, like cooking doesn't use much energy. It doesn't really matter so much. The main thing to think about with cooking actually is the health thing, because gas cooking actually puts sort of particulate pollution in your air, which has been shown to be bad, especially for kids who are prone to asthma and people with respiratory illnesses. But the The other part of this story, though, is, I mentioned before about that gas fixed connection charge. If you get one of these appliances off, if you get your last appliance off gas, you suddenly save another $300 per year, not in addition to any usage saving, because when you close your gas account, you no longer have to pay that daily connection. And that actually makes quite a big difference. And that's why, even though cooking doesn't cost much money compared to the other stuff, and even though cooking with induction is not really that much cheaper than cooking with gas, if this chart here is, if you only have a gas cooktop on gas and you swap that for induction, you actually save, $2,000 to $3,000 over 10 years because you're losing that supply charge. The more recent report that I showed you looked at another useful metric, which is just what are your annual energy bills in Melbourne, depending on what type of appliances you have in your house. And we looked at dual fuel home with, those 3 appliances being gas, an all electric home with those 3 appliances being modern, efficient electric ones, and the all electric home with solar. And that's the first 3 columns in each set, because this is 2022, 2023, 2024. We've factored in the rising electricity and gas prices in this one. And this basically shows that, in each year, the dual fuel home has higher annual energy bills, that's combined gas and electricity bills. The all electric is significantly cheaper than the gas, and the all electric with solar is like half that, because you save a lot of money by having the solar. And then the last 3 columns in each one, that's for a new home that's 7-star efficient, so much more thermally efficient, better insulation and everything. And everything is, you can see the relationship's still pretty similar, but it's all lower because, again, there's so much energy is used for heating in Melbourne that when your house has good thermal performance, you actually save a lot of electricity. So that's all in that report. If you're really interested in that, you can look up that report on Renewy's website and read all the gory details. I'm going to move on to the emissions story, because this is something also that people are very interested in. And it's also one that there's a bit of misinformation or misunderstanding about, because, again, gas is often talked about as a much lower emissions fuel than electricity. And for a long time, that was probably true, because electricity was basically made by brown coal in Victoria, which is the most polluting coal that there is. But of course, now there's a lot of renewable energy in the grid as well. So that's brought down the emissions intensity of electricity quite a bit. It's still higher than gas. Gas has much less emissions than electricity. There's a bit of a caveat there, because the emissions of electricity generations are very tightly regulated and controlled and monitored, because it's just under the regulatory framework for electricity. The emissions are measured and monitored, and the emissions of gas are not closely monitored and measured. So there's a lot of doubt as to how accurate the official figures are. And some people say the emissions of gas might be 2 or 3 times higher than the official figures, but I'm not qualified enough to have a definitive view on that. So I'm going with the official figures. In Victoria, the emissions intensity of gas, and that's basically how much carbon emissions there are per unit, like in this case, it's per kilowatt hour. We're using the same units for both fuels. The emissions intensity of gas and compared to the emissions intensity of electricity, electricity in Victoria is 4.5 times more dirty in terms of carbon emissions than gas. So 4.5 times more emissions with electricity than with gas, which sounds bad, right? If we're going all electric, are we going to be causing more emissions? And that's another thing that the gas industry will sort of talk up. Well, yeah, electricity is much dirtier than gas. And again, if you think back to what we said about the different appliances, that's again the important factor here. Once again, gas ducted heater, 80% efficient, reverse cycle aircon, 450. The reverse cycle air conditioner is 5.5 times more efficient than the gas ducted heater. So basically, you need to use 5.5 times as much gas to get the same heat out, which means that ends up being more emissions, because electricity is only 4.5 times more emissions intensive. And it's pretty similar with hot water. Heat pump hot water is 5 times more efficient than gas. So you've got to use 5 times the gas to get the same heat, which also makes using a hot water a gas hot water system more emissions intensive than using a heat pump hot water service. And, you know, this is all the main states, that's Victoria. This and you know, Renew did a bit more of an exhaustive study in 2019 of using a similar approach to the cost study of, okay, let's look at the house in total and all its electricity usage and its, you know, there's different appliances and how does the emissions of an all electric home compare to the emissions of a dual fuel home? We looked at a few cities in each state, and the Melbourne ones are over the side here. And once again, no, that's Melbourne, sorry, the other Victorian ones. It's a bit close, but dual fuel homes have higher emissions than the equivalent all electric homes. Everywhere in Victoria, apart from the really hot areas, like you'll see in Mildura, it's actually a tiny bit more emissions in with all electric, and that'll be different now because electricity has become less emissions intensive since we did this study. So that'd be more like level. And all around the rest of Australia, it's only in Brisbane and Sydney where there's not that much heating. They're the only places where all electric homes have more emissions. Everywhere else, all electric homes have lower emissions than dual fuel homes. And that's emissions now. Emissions keep changing. Gas is actually getting dirtier because, like I mentioned before about the Bass Strait oil rigs drying up, more and more gas in Australia now is not taken from deep sea drilling, but is on ground, what's called unconventional. You would have heard of coal seam gas and fracking. They're the most common ways for new gas projects to be happening now. In Victoria, we're still getting the dregs out of Bass Strait, but most other places, most of the gas comes from fracking or coal seams, and that's much more emissions intensive than taking gas from sort of drilling, deep sea drilling, as well as, you know, methane leaks and groundwater risks. And of course, the other thing with our gas industry is, you know, one of the things that's driving the price is that we're exporting so much gas. About 70 or 80% of the gas that we mine in Australia is exported overseas. And that's what's driving our price high. So when people talk about a gas shortage, the shortage is because the gas companies are selling 80% of it overseas and only leaving us with 20%. So gas is getting dirtier. Electricity is getting cleaner every year. Solar farms, wind turbines, ginormous projects like Snowy Hydro, when that's done, that's like basically a ginormous battery that will store excess solar energy during the day and use it at night. As well as, of course, you know, people putting solar on their roofs, that all becomes part of the grid. When you're exporting electricity from your solar, that's part of the grid. So every year the electricity grid gets cleaner. It's already about 30% renewable, which surprises some people because we're used to thinking of electricity as coal. 30% of it is not coal or gas, it's solar, wind, and hydro. We buy a lot of hydro from Tasmania. There's heaps of solar farms and wind farms. And we also buy solar and wind from New South Wales and South Australia. And we are heading towards 100% renewable eventually. The Victorian government has a 50% renewable energy target by 2030, 95 by 2035. And nationally, AEMO, which is an organisation that operates the national electricity grid, they're predicting about 83% renewable energy in 2030. So that's a huge change. So if we look back at this emissions chart, that's 2022, because this is the 2022 figures. That's emissions of electricity and the emissions of gas in these 6 states. Yeah, 6 states? Yeah, 6 states. That's now, but what does 2030 look like? Have a look at this. It blew my mind when I did these numbers. That's what happens in the next 7 years. So much more renewable energy comes online that the emissions of the electricity grid in every state drops by heaps, apart from SA and Tas, because they've already got very clean electricity. And, you know, Victoria goes from the dirtiest to actually still the dirtiest, but less than gas. We've got gas about the same here. It's probably going to be higher. But by 2030, in every state, electricity is less emissions intensive than gas. And that's before you even factor in that whole multiplier issue with the more efficient appliances. So basically, you know, even though it's a bit, you know, it's a bit here and there now as to, you know, it's a bit sort of not that different at the moment, you know, your new sort of reverse cycle air conditioner or heat pump is still going to be going in 2030, and it's going to be heaps more emissions friendly by then. So it's always dynamic, it's always changing. That's the difference. Next, I'm going to look at the appliances, because people thinking of going electric often want to know how the appliances are different, and there's a bit of misinformation going around about some of these new types of appliances as well. So I'm going to start with hot water because we get the most questions about hot water. Your heat pump hot water system is pretty much like your traditional sort of gas storage hot water system. I'm sure that some of you probably have gas storage hot water systems. Others will probably have the instantaneous ones, which are a bit different. The instantaneous gas is actually much more efficient than the gas storage because you lose a bit of heat with storage. And it's the same with the heat pumps. You do lose a bit of heat with the storage. But, as I said, they're so much more efficient. But they basically work just like those gas storage, water's in there, whack the heat into it. It's just instead of burning gas, you're using the heat pump. Some of them have the separate box like air conditioners have. Some of them have the compressor and condenser as part of the tank. Not that much difference between them. It's really, these ones are good for if you've got limited space. These ones, if the condenser breaks down, it's easy to replace it and keep the same tank. So there's, pros and cons. People often ask, oh, will there be enough hot water? I've heard that they don't give you as much hot water. It's like, they're just a tank with hot water. You just got to get the right size tank. If you've ever had to buy a storage hot water system, you know that you've got to know, how big's my house, how many bedrooms or how many people live in the house, what's the right size tank? Is it 300 liters, 400 liters or whatever? You just need to know what the right size tank is for your house and just get that size tank. That's as simple as it is. Some plumbers will say, oh, these heat pumps, hot waters are really unreliable. They don't work when it's cold. That's not true. They do work when it's cold. They break down a lot. That was a bit true in, 20 years ago. They didn't work as well in the cold. They did break down a bit more. The technology's come a long way. Unless you get the absolute cheapest ones, which can be a bit flaky, all the sort of mid-priced and up ones work really good. They work well in cold weather as well as in hot weather. They use them in Scandinavia and, very cold places, basically. If you're shopping for one, avoid the cheapest brands, as you would do with most things that are sort of want to last a while. It's good to find an installer who is familiar with installing heat pump hot water systems because they're a bit different to install, and some plumbers don't like to do it because they're not used to doing it, and so they might try to talk you out of it. We've had a lot of people say that happens. There are different refrigerants used in them, and CO2 is actually the best one to use because it has actually the lowest global warming potential if it leaks. That seems counterintuitive because isn't it all about carbon dioxide emissions, right? Basically, the other refrigerants are actually worse than carbon dioxide for greenhouse emissions. But there's a few other good ones like propane and butane, and ammonia, which you probably wouldn't think of as refrigerants, but they do work as refrigerants. But also you want to look for high coefficient of performance. This is a little technical term. It's often called the COP. And that's basically the measure of how efficient it is. I said before that, it's 450% more efficient, say, or 450% efficient. That means it's got a COP of 4.5. The COP is how much more energy how many times, what's the multiplier on energy in to energy out? So a COP of 4.5 or 5 or 6 is great. It means that you're getting 4.5, 5, 6 times energy out compared to energy in. And also look for low noise. As you might know, these compressors can make a bit of noise and they're all rated in decibels. So look for the quieter ones. It might cost a bit more, but it might be better for your comfort as well as your neighbors. And there are some restrictions on location depending on the noise level of the appliances, and the council's probably got some regs on that. So that's good to keep in mind. And if you want to find out more about refrigerants, I'm not an expert on refrigerants and it's a bit complicated, but if you Google, refrigerants for heat pumps in Australia, you'll find really good information on that. Before I go on, actually, I did mention, instantaneous gas hot water, which people often like and is quite efficient. You can get instantaneous electric hot water systems, but they're not heat pumps. They use resistive electricity. They're actually relatively cheap to run because you save all those storage losses, but they're very expensive to buy and they need a really high capacity electricity connection, like 20 amps or something, or 30 amps, because they use only a small amount of electricity, but intensely for a short period of time. So they're not really very practical for most people. So we don't generally, haven't really talked to many people who've got them because they're expensive and they're expensive to install. Reverse cycle air cons, you're probably more familiar with these because, you know, the air conditioner in your house is probably a reverse cycle air conditioner. And these heat great. People often don't use them for heating because we're used to thinking electric heating is expensive, but as we've discussed, the heat pump sort of technology means it uses way less electricity than a regular electric heater. So they're not expensive to heat. In fact, as we said, they're cheaper than using a gas heater. And again, for the reverse cycle air cons, you know, you would probably put a few in your house. If you're used to sort of ducted heating, where you want the whole house to be warm, you'd need a few reverse cycle air conditioners. And that's how we did our modeling. We had, like, you know, one main air conditioner in the main room, like a larger size one, and a few smaller ones around the house, sort of strategically located, depending on the size of the house. And there's really a bit of trial and error in how you use these things. If your house has good insulation, then the temperature equalizes through the house. So it doesn't really matter so much where they're located. And if you have trouble heating your house, it's always best to fix your insulation before you start spending money on new heaters, because a great efficient heater in a poorly insulated house will still cost a lot of money to run and won't heat the house properly. Some people don't like the air blowing on them from reverse cycle air conditioners, but you know that you can use a low fan speed and vary the direction that it blows, and it changes it a lot. But you can also get, you know, running them on quite low usually works. You can get ducted heat pumps that work more like ducted heating, but they just are less efficient because there's lots of losses in the ducting. We're most familiar with the single split systems. That's the indoor unit and the outdoor unit. You might have a few, and you might have a couple of the outdoor units down the side of the house. You can get these multi-split systems where you got one bigger outdoor unit that powers a few indoor units. Some people really like those, and they're useful if you've got limited outdoor space, but they're a bit less efficient just because you've got the bigger compressor trying to power different ones at the same time. And the single ones are sort of much more tailored and more efficient, but the multi-splits can be really good, and they're a good solution if you've got limited outdoor space. You can get floor level ones. You can run them on much lower fan speeds and you'll still feel the heat more. Some people really like them. I think they're a great idea. They're not very common and they can be a bit more expensive, but a lot of people who've got them really like them because they're more like a traditional heater where you can stand in front of it and feel the heat and that sort of stuff. And some people really hate the way they look on the wall. And, you know, we've seen people who sort of conceal them in sort of cladding like this, you know, the thing's inside there and you've got a little access panel. So you can do that if you like. And again, there's a few things to think about if you're shopping for one. Look for the high star rating. You know, they've all got the star rating like a lot of electrical appliances have. The more the star rating, the more efficient they are. You know, you can look at the COP, the coefficient of performance, if you like, but the star rating is a really good indicator of that. The higher COP will have a higher star rating. Like I said, the ducted ones are less efficient, but some people prefer it, and that could be worth it. They still, you know, they're still efficient because of the heat pump technology. So it's still more efficient than ducted gas heating. But there's lots of issues with ducts. They can get, you know, rats get into them and they can get loose, and you're more likely to lose heat. Again, find an installer who knows what they're doing with them. Look for refrigerants with low global warming potential and the noise issue as well. Again, induction cooktop. Now, this is not heat pump technology, but this is also not resistive. This is another type of electrical technology, induction. The induction basically sets up an electromagnetic field that heats the cooking appliance directly rather than via making something hot to touch it. It actually stimulates like the molecules inside the pot. It's very, very different to the electric stoves that you might be used to, because they turn on and off and down with very quick response, similar to gas. Turn them up, they get hotter. Turn them down, they get less hot, which is very different to the old-fashioned resistive ones where, you know, you turn it on and it takes 5 minutes before it's hot, and then you turn it down and it takes 5 minutes before it cools down. These respond pretty instantly like gas. They boil water as quick as gas. We've tested them next to each other. They're sort of safer because you don't have the open flame. And, you know, the manufacturers always use these photos of, you know, a block of chocolate right next to the pot full of melted chocolate. That really does happen because the top surface doesn't actually get hot. Just inside the pot gets hot. But because of the way it works, it needs the right sort of metal cookware to work. So it doesn't work with ceramic cookware, doesn't work with copper. It doesn't work with aluminium, and some really low grade stainless steel that's got lots of other stuff mixed in with it. It doesn't work so well either. The general guide is if a fridge magnet sticks to your pot, then it'll work with induction. But if you've got some favorite cookware that doesn't work with induction, you can actually get special plates that you put on your induction, and the induction stove heats up the plate and the plate gets hot, and then that heats the pot from below. So it's that lets you use cookware. If you've got special cookware that doesn't work with induction, that actually lets you use it on an induction cooktop. And again, another big advantage of induction is that you don't get the indoor air pollution that you get with gas. If you're looking for induction, look, there's so many different models. They all work pretty much the same. They all have different sorts of controls. Try them out in the store and find the controls that make sense to you. That'll make a difference. Check reviews. That's always a good idea when you're buying stuff like this. Yeah, check your pots. And one consideration with them is that a bit similar to those instantaneous gas hot water systems, they do need a fair bit of power capacity. They don't use much electricity, but they use it in spikes. So it's not as much as as the instantaneous hot water, but you might need to upgrade to like 15 amp circuit or something. So you will need to check what the power requirements are for your the one that you're thinking of buying, and see if your house can support it, or if you need a switchboard upgrade. Look, switchboard upgrades are a thing that a lot of people are going to need to do in the next few years anyway, as we get more and more electric appliances and when people start getting electric cars. So, if you've got the resources, it can be a good thing to do a bit of an upgrade anyway. The other thing to keep in mind when you're looking for induction cooktops is make sure you understand the dimensions that you're working with, the hole that's left when you take out your gas one, because they come in different sizes. And I've spoken to a few people who bought the most awesome whiz-bang induction cooktop that they just loved, and then found it wouldn't fit on their bench. They didn't check the measurements. So that's a good one to do. And if you want to try out induction to see if you like it, you can actually buy them quite cheaply, like portable ones from like IKEA and Aldi and that, and you can just plug them into PowerPoint and try cooking on induction and see if you like it and see if your pots work. That's what I did when I was working at Renew. I tried out theirs to see what it was like, and I was very surprised. I love cooking. I love my gas stove, but using the induction cooktop, it's like, yeah, I could totally use one of these. It's just as good as using gas. So that was a bit of an eye-opener for me. So that's one to try if you're a bit doubtful. I want to go over a few alternatives to these appliances. Those three appliances I talked about, the heat pump, hot water, the reverse cycle air conditioners, induction cooktops, they are the sort of standard efficient ones that we generally recommend as being really good replacements for gas appliances. But there are some other appliances that are worth mentioning because people often ask about them. And one is solar hot water, which you would have seen around, and they've been around for quite a while. And they're pretty popular, partly because there's been a state government requirement to put them on in certain developments and for new houses. They work a bit differently to heat pumps. They have solar collectors. They're not the same as solar panels. They actually heat the water directly with these collectors, and then they store the hot water in a tank, either a tank on the roof like that, or some of them have like a tank on the ground that looks more like a regular hot water tank, and they have a pump that connects them together. Look, a lot of people love these. I did a bit of research on the costs. They need to have a booster, because if it's cloudy and the water doesn't get hot, you still need hot water, and it's also safety. The water has to stay at a certain temperature to avoid Legionella. That's the thing with all hot water systems. So you either get electric boosted or gas boosted. Electric boosted costs a little more than running a heat pump. Gas boosted costs maybe about the same or maybe a bit less than running a heat pump. So they're sort of, economically pretty similar. They do cost a lot more to buy though. They're pretty expensive. And if you've got solar, use a space to put solar panels and run a heat pump off your solar, and then it's almost free. So that's a good consideration. But solar might be right for you, solar hot water, and you can get away with it in Melbourne if you're prepared to do a bit of boosting, and it'll cost you about the same as a regular hot water system. They actually work much better in much hotter climates like Queensland and WA. Hydronic heating, a lot of people love. They love the heat wafting around the house. Look, the whole house heat you get from hydronic heating is very pleasant. Hydronic basically heats water, circulates it through radiators or under the floor. They're very expensive to buy and install and to run, so they're not a good economical outcome, but people do like them. And if you like them, they might be worth it. They are a bit slow to heat up and cool down. And if your house is well insulated, you'll probably overheat. And we often talk to people who end up having to open their windows in the middle of winter because their hydronic system's going and it's too hot. And they generally run on gas. Heat pump ones are more expensive, and you can't just convert a gas one to a heat pump because the pipes are the wrong diameter, the radiators are the wrong size, and they don't cool. So, you know, some people swear by hydronic, and if you really love it, go for it. But we don't consider them in the sort of efficient electric category because they're expensive. Evaporative cooling is another one that people ask a bit about. You would have seen these on houses. You might have it in your house. They're pretty cheap to run in terms of electricity, but they also use quite a bit of water. Could be up to about 20 litres per hour. So that can add up in cost and also in water. And look, they work pretty well. They're less effective when there's high humidity because it's a damp cooling that they put out. And we're actually getting more humid in Victoria, which you would have noticed the last couple of summers. So I don't know that they're the great choice going forward, to be honest. And of course, you know, reverse cycle air conditioners heat and cool. So you sort of pay once for the two functions, whereas if you've got a cooling system like this, you still need to buy heating. So, but again, some people really like them. You need to cover the ducts in winter, the outlets, otherwise you lose heat from your heating. So that's the lowdown on appliances. How do you go about doing the shift? We're getting close to the end here, so we'll be time for questions soon. First thing is there's a lot of help with the cost of these upgrades. If you decide you want to move from being dual fuel to all electric, you want to buy some heat pump hot water systems or reverse cycle air conditioners. There's a few programs the Victorian government runs that will give you a discount on these technologies. There's heaters can be gotten through the Victorian Energy Upgrades program. You would all be familiar. You all would have encountered this program probably because when people come to your door with offering you free light bulbs, that's the Victorian Energy Upgrades program. It's linked to the Victorian Energy Efficiency Target. They give you the light bulbs. You use less electricity. They get paid for making people be less efficient. They get paid by electricity retailers who are obliged to get their customers more efficient. That's sort of how it works. There's heaps of stuff in that program that's not sort of no cost for the consumer, but that just gives a big discount. And one of them is heaters. You can get efficient reverse cycle air conditioners, other heat pump based heating through the program. You get a rebate. It's a bit complicated. Depends on what inefficient heating you've currently got and what you replace it with, but you can get between $150 and about $1,300 rebate on new heating, depending what you get. So that's one to look out for. And for hot water, there's a specific hot water rebate under the Solar Homes program in Solar Victoria. This is the new big solar rebate program Victorian government's had for the last couple of years. It used to be just a rebate for solar hot water systems, but they changed it recently to also include heat pumps. You get a 50% discount of the value of up to $1,000 on a solar hot water system or a heat pump hot water system. And that's got the same eligibility as all the other Solar Victoria programs, which is basically unless you're in the top 10% of incomes, you're probably eligible. The Victorian government is currently working on new heating upgrade rebate programs, but I don't know any details of that yet. I just know that they're working on it. So watch whatever space you need to watch to find out about that. So that's the bit of a financial assistance for doing it. But what's the process? And look, the way that we did our modeling on the cost was we based it on one appliance wears out and needs to be replaced, replace it with the efficient electric one instead of another gas one. In our view, that's the natural way to upgrade. You know, if you're really dead keen and if you've got the resources, sure, rip out all your gas appliances, whack in all the electric ones. But for most people, it'd be like, well, my heater works fine. I'll replace it when it needs to be replaced. And that's what people will normally do. So if it's failing, that's the time to go, well, let's get the electric one instead of gas. We know that the cost is about the same or maybe a bit more, but the cost of running is much less. It's particularly, and It's a particularly important issue with hot water, is that if you do want to change your hot water to a heat pump or solar or something, when it fails, do your research first, find out the model that you want, find out someone who can install it and find out a supplier who's got supply, because if it's ever happened to you before, and I'm sure it's happened to some of you, when your hot water fails, you don't have any time to do anything because you just want to have a hot shower. Nobody likes a cold shower, apart from 1 or 2 people. It always happens very quickly. And I've spoken to so many people who were really keen to replace their old gas hot water system with a heat pump. And then when their gas hot water system failed, they call up the plumber, and the plumber's like, well, I can put a new one in right now. I've got one on the truck, another gas one. Oh, if you want a heat pump, it's going to take a week and a half. So they end up getting the gas one when that's the last thing that they wanted, but they weren't prepared and they weren't ready. So do your research with hot water if you want to do it, and find out what you would need and be ready, and find out who's got them in stock and keep posted on that. Or even, when it's getting towards the age where you think, it's probably getting pretty old, it doesn't hurt to sort of replace it when it's maybe 15 years old or something, and go, let's get ahead of the game and replace it before it breaks down and not have to have a cold shower. If you've only got one gas appliance, it's always worth replacing immediately, no matter what it is, because you get the money back with the saving of the gas connection. And for a lot of people, they'll do the heating, then they'll do the hot water, and then they've just got the stove, and it's like, just do that now. That's the most economical way. Other considerations, things to check is, like I mentioned a few times, your electricity supply. Everyone's switchboards are different. Everyone's line to the street is different. There's different capacities. You'll need to check that sort of stuff, because you might need to upgrade either your internal wiring, or hopefully not, but sometimes the wiring to the street. That's the most expensive and annoying one. But, if you're putting in an air conditioner, you might need to do this anyway. You might have had to do this anyway. A lot of us have had to do it because we're using more electrical appliances than ever before. And some of our houses are really old and weren't really made for that much use. So is your switchboard big enough? Has it got spare slots for new circuits? What's the capacity of it? And also check out the locations, because, these heat pumps have external units. They can go in the roof, they can go in the wall, they can go in the ground, but figure out where you need to put them in your house. And, when you're doing it, find installers who are familiar with technology and with those types of models, because they all know the best way to do it. Now, once again, I've talked about a few main appliances as the most recommended ones, but everyone's situation is different. And one thing that we discovered doing this work was some of the sort of edge cases. And here are a few examples. If you've got really, really, really low hot water consumption, then a heat pump hot water is probably not cost effective for you. It's probably going to cost you more, because you're using so little, you really never recoup the cost. You might want to do it anyway, great. But if it's really about the economic issues for you, then if you've got super low hot water consumption, maybe an instantaneous gas hot water is best if you're happy to stay on gas. This is often the case, say, for holiday houses that are not used half the time. You just waste so much electricity by heating up a big tank every day and letting it cool down. If you've got a really big solar system in your house, it might be more cost effective to get an old-fashioned sort of electric hot water system, resistive electric hot water system, either in the ceiling, that goes on an overnight rate maybe, or on the ground, and just set the timer so that it runs while your solar is generating. It uses a lot more electricity than a heat pump, but if you've got heaps of solar and lots that you don't use, you may as well use it, and it can actually be cheaper to use a cheap resistive electric hot water system than a more expensive heat pump that's got more issues with breaking down, because those cheap hot water systems can last for decades. If you've got no room for a heat pump, that's when maybe solar is good for you. Now for cooking, look, some people really, really, really love gas. Maybe not just for, the controllability, because you can get that controllability with induction, but maybe for flame grilling stuff, or for using woks and that. And look, you can get induction cooktops with wok adapters or special wok elements on them. But I've known a few people who basically they electrified everything else, and then they got a plumber to do a connector to a barbecue bottle, basically, and they ran their cooktop off a barbecue bottle that was on the outside of the wall. Bit more expensive than running induction, but they love the gas cooking. Doesn't cost that much anyway, so that worked for them. But that's just a few things to think about. I'll try and finish up because we're running a bit low on time. You'll need to close your gas account if you go off gas so that you don't have to keep paying that daily charge. That can be a bit tricky because the gas companies don't like you doing it and they'll try to talk you out of it. You just gotta knuckle in and insist. Basically, there's probably going to be an account closing fee. You don't have to have the gas meter removed. You can just leave it there. They'll come and they'll disconnect it maybe, or they'll just turn the tap off and lock it off so you can't use gas when you close your account. If you want the gas meter removed, you have to pay a much bigger fee, maybe about $1,000. For some people, that's worth it to them, especially if they want to do some landscaping and just get the gas stuff off their property. If there's an electricity outage, it's a pain. Basically, though, most modern gas appliances need electricity anyway, so it doesn't make that much difference for a lot of people whether you've got gas or electric when you've got an outage. An alternative way to cook is always helpful if you've got a gas barbecue or a butane cooker or something. But also, especially in the city, outages don't really happen very often. So, you know, that just annoys us whenever it happens anyway. A good way to test out the heating is if you've got an air conditioner that does heat, just try it. Try it when it's, you know, especially the in-between sort of season, like right now, when it's not super cold. Try the air conditioner in your room on a heater instead of using the gas heating. See how it feels. See what difference it makes to your bill. You could be surprised. And we did a test of this. One large living room, use a reverse cycle air conditioner instead of a gas wall heater. You save about $200 over winter in Melbourne doing that. And that's prices of a few years ago. It's probably, you save even more now. I'll run quickly through the rest. If you're building a new home, just don't get gas at all. Just go all electric. It's way cheaper to build. And from the get-go, you just start saving money. Renew did a bunch of research on this a couple of years ago. Again, new homes more efficient. You use less electricity. And even whether you got a new home or an old home, good insulation and draft sealing makes a huge difference. You can upgrade an old home to 1 or 2 stars, better performance usually. You won't get an old home up to 7 stars, but you can do pretty well with insulation and draft sealing. Solar panels are the perfect complement to an all-electric home because you're using more electricity because you're not using gas, and you can use a whole lot from your solar. So that really works out well for all-electric homes. And this is from the Victorian government's gas substitution policy roadmap, and they compared, you know, dual fuel home with all electric homes, and then with a dual fuel home and an all electric home with solar, and their annual bills are significantly lower because they got the solar panels. And once you've done your all electric thing, you know, you can start thinking about the next fuel to get rid of, which is petrol. The Victorian government's just announced an electric vehicle subsidy. So, you know, I think electric vehicles are still just starting to happen, but in the next few years, I think there's going to be a big change. So start to think about that too, because that's the next step in going all electric, is to get your mobile fuel use electric as well. And look, that's pretty much the end of my presentation. I've pulled together a few of the resources, a couple that I've mentioned already, the Solar Homes program and the Victorian Energy Upgrades program. There's a few others here. You can, if these some of these notes might get sent around, I'm not sure, but you know, the residential efficiency scorecard is a system the Victorian government has that will do an energy assessment of your home and tell you what the best bang for buck is in order to get your energy usage down and get more efficient. If you go to the energy comparison website that the Victorian government runs, you can apply to get a $250 basically chunk of money sent into your bank account just for trying out the energy comparison service. And while you're there, see if you can find a cheaper retailer. Sustainability Victoria, just Google them. They have a great web page on their site that's got all great information about going all electric. And the Your Home website, which is a Commonwealth government thing, that's just the absolute exhaustive reference to everything to do with household energy efficiency and thermal efficiency. So that's a really good resource. So keep all those in mind. That's the end of my presentation now, but I'll stick around for questions. So thanks very much. Now my mouse has disappeared. There you go. Got it.
Well, I'd just like to say thanks, Dean, for that really interesting presentation. There were certainly some gold nuggets in there that I'm taking away from today. So thank you for that. It was very comprehensive. Generated quite a bit of interest and a number of questions have come in.
Right.
You did answer a few of them as we went along. So I'll probably just skip over those for now, but if you're in the mood, maybe we can try tackling some of them.
So there we go.
Okay, no worries. So we have a crack in the heat exchanger of our gas ducted heating system. I want to go electric. So do I have the option of getting a heat pump instead?
Yes, you can do heat pump ducted systems. You would need to, you would need to make sure that your ducts are okay, because ducts can get worn away over time and they can get holes in them from rodents and stuff like that. But there definitely are heat pump ducted systems. I'm actually not 100% sure if the ducts are the same diameter or if you need different ducts. I should find that out for next time I do one of these. But I'm pretty sure that you can, with a bit of effort, retrofit a heat pump into duct, but you probably need to talk to a heating specialist to see, because it might depend on your particular type of ducted system. And like I say in the presentation, heat pump ducted systems, they're around, people use them. They're a bit less efficient than the split systems because you have losses in the ducting. Even when the ducting is in good condition, you get some losses, but they're still much more efficient than gas ducting. So it's certainly if you really like that whole of house heating, then that's certainly a good one to go for. Yeah.
And just on that, I know that some of the ducts that you can install actually have insulation around them. So if you've got an older setup, would it make sense potentially to replace some of that duct work?
Generally, if you're doing an upgrade to a ducted system, it's always good to get the ducts inspected by whoever's going to do the repair or installation or replacement, because they'll check for holes and they'll also check for insulation. I mean, ducts should be insulated. Modern ducts probably are better insulated than old ones because insulation technology has improved a bit. And the insulation is really important in the ducts. Like, you basically lose less heat if they're well insulated. But it's also it's more expensive to replace all the ducts than to just replace a unit. So often people think of that, oh, it's going to cost this much more. But when you think about how long these units last for and how much money is spent on heating, it's actually worthwhile economically to get the ducts upgraded if they need it.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. We also have paddle radiators using gas hot water with combo boiler and heat pump and thermostat control, including ambient thermostat outside. How efficient is that system versus electric heating, noting the capital cost was around 10K has already been spent? I think going solar and battery for our house electricity. Is it worth going solar when heating will remain gas?
So I didn't clarify, was that a gas system or is it a heat pump system?
So it's a gas hot water with combo boiler and heat pump.
Right. I'm not sure. I know I've seen some combo, some hydronic gas hot water and hydronic heating combo, gas hot water and hydronic heating combo systems. I'm not sure if that's what you're referring to, because the heat pump normally refers to an electric heat pump. If it's a combo gas and electric heat pump, I'm not sure. Certainly the gas boiler and hydronic systems, it's difficult, as I sort of mentioned briefly in the hydronic section. It's you can't usually convert gas hydronic systems to heat pump because they use different diameter pipes and different size radiators. Some may be more easy to do than others. It depends on the radiators, it depends on how accessible the pipes are. That's probably a question for a heating specialist. Certainly, if you do manage to convert from gas to heat pump, it is much more efficient. If you're happy with the gas system as it is, that's sort of okay too, I guess. If you really want to get off the gas, then it's about, can you convert it? How much work and cost is involved in converting it? So I'm not sure if I've properly understood that question properly, but that's as far as I can make out.
Sounds like it's a bit of a complex setup.
Yeah, it does sound like something you probably want to talk to a heating specialist, because these combo systems are pretty complex.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
The second part of that was we're thinking of going solar and battery for house electricity. Is it worth going solar when heating will remain gas?
Okay, so gas, yes. Look, it is still worth it. You still save a lot and you can use all your other electricity usage with it, especially if you go in battery, because then you can, use different times. But heating is a big energy use. So, solar I mean, in some ways, you know, solar works better with all electric because you can use it to power anything that you use. The more loads that you have on gas, then solar can't serve those loads, but it depends on your other usage. If you've got enough other electricity usage, it may still be worthwhile. And if you're able to export your unused solar, even though it doesn't come directly off, it might not come directly off your gas bill, but you're still getting paid for exporting solar, which in effect is helping to subsidize your gas usage. So it can still be worth it, absolutely. It's just always worth more. It's always worth it more when you're all electric because you can more easily, because it's so much, the cheapest way to use, the best saving with solar is to use the solar electricity directly. You get it for free. You're not buying electricity from your retailer at all. So the more electric stuff you've got, the better value you can get from solar. But it's certainly still worth it. And look, you know, still 75–80% of houses in Melbourne have gas still. We used to do, you know, advisory modeling for people all the time on solar systems, and they've got gas and they still get good benefit from solar systems. Yeah.
I remember the days when a lot of people were on the premium feed-in tariff for their solar systems. So it made more sense to actually export your energy to the grid. And I know some of the retail energy companies that supply gas and electric would actually transfer those credits across to your gas account. So that was a major benefit.
Yes, that's true.
Those days are over.
Yeah, no, that's true. Those days are right. And just as well, because, you know, you actually want more electricity usage during the day because there's so much solar in the grid now that we need people to use in the day.
Great. There's just a general question, I guess, about whether the installation costs have been considered when you did your studies. There's an example here, retrofitting induction cooktops can become very costly.
Yeah, look, we did factor in installation costs and we used average installation costs, and we actually spoke to people in the industry to get averages, but they can vary a lot. And in particular for induction cooktops, because it really, like I mentioned about the size thing, especially if you're going to different size or if you need to get an upgrade electrical connection, it can cost quite a bit more. So yeah, they do vary a lot. So we used average costs. It definitely can vary a lot. Yeah.
Next question is, we have a gas fire heater on town gas, which we would like to keep working. It's cozy to watch. How could it be kept going if town gas is disconnected? Are there any electric alternatives that look real?
Depends what you mean by real. I mean, with AI technology now, they're going to get better, right? Yeah, look, there are some electric ones. I don't think they look that real, but they still have the general sort of ambient sort of feeling of it. But yeah, no, that's a thing. You know, we love fire. It's you know, it's a deep limbic sort of thing, isn't it? You know, fire is such a symbolic thing in our society. Yeah, but look, I haven't done a big study of whatsoever. I know there are electric ones, and I don't think they look that real. Some of the gas ones don't look that real either, but some of them really do because they actually use flame. So yeah, look, I'm not sure. Can you run one off a gas bottle? Maybe. And really, you know, if you've got a thing that you really like using gas for, like, you know, if you can get a converter to use like a barbecue type LPG gas bottle, sure, it's going to cost you a bit more than if you were, you know, not if you didn't have it. But if it's worth it to you, that's great. And you know, we do what we can, right? You know, the dream ideal might be, oh, electric everything and renewable everything. But, you know, we do as much as we can. It's a collective responsibility. And, you know, if using something for gas is really important to you, then go for it and do everything else.
I've actually heard of people who like to see, you know, open fireplaces, downloading a video on loop and watching it on their TV while they've got their heater on.
Yep, I've got a friend who's got one of those. It's always on all the time, and they love it. So, you know, that's great.
There might be one way around it. Okay, next, a simple question. What's the easiest way to have an old gas boosted solar hot water system removed? If we have a heat pump water heater installed, will the provider remove the rubbish old one?
I'm actually not sure. Sorry, because I'm not involved in the sort of physical aspects of the appliances. I was involved in doing the modeling and that, so I'm not sure. I expect that some will and some won't. I know that if you're using those Victorian energy upgrades where you're getting the rebate for removing the old one, and replacing it with a more efficient one, in those cases, they take the old one because they need to show that they've taken it out of circulation, because it's the same as the people who do your light globes. They have to take your old light globes and record and prove that they've taken them, because the system hinges on on knowing that the old inefficient device is no longer being used by anyone. Like, if you sell your older inefficient one to someone, then they're not getting the efficiency benefits, so you wouldn't be eligible for the rebate. So certainly if you're using the program, you would. Otherwise, I think some installers do and some don't, and it might be a matter of cost.
It may very well be if the installer actually installed solar hot water units to begin with, they'd be more likely to remove it on your behalf.
Yeah, possibly, yeah. But I think you just need to, speak to the installer and see and find out.
Okay. So just a general comment here. I too think the floor mount split system looks much better than the wall mount units, but I've never seen one in the wild. Are the wall mount units more efficient for heating, cooling, or both? Why are they the default?
I don't know why they're the default. I think they're easy to install. That might be why. I think that it's partly about, installed up on the ceiling means that it doesn't affect what you can have on the walls if you've got a bookcase or a couch, whereas a wall mounted system, you have to work around it in the room. I think that may be the reasons. I'm not exactly sure. I agree with you. I think they look way better. If I owned a house, I would totally be looking at getting one of those. They are more expensive because they're less common. I've looked into it. They're not less efficient necessarily, but there's less range to choose from. So you might be able to find a more efficient high wall mount one just because there are so many more on the market. But no, there's nothing inherently about them that makes them less efficient. The efficiency is really all in the outside unit. That's what does the work.
It may very well be that if people are upgrading an old gas heater that takes up the same physical dimensions, that's a better fit for them as well.
Totally.
Yeah, so that might work. Just a question about where can I get the things for induction to use aluminium pots, or what are they called?
Good. I'm not 100% sure what they're called, but I don't know where to get them. I just know that they exist. So sorry. This sounds like some homework to do for the next one. You might just need to Google it and find out. It might be called an induction adapter of some kind. I'm not sure. I know that the ones for woks are called wok adapters for induction cooktops, and they sit on the induction hot plate, and they're a bit cone shaped, and they've got a dish so you can put your wok inside it. So the ones for regular ones, they're probably called induction adapters. I'm not exactly sure. Sorry. I realize it would be really good to have nailed that before mentioning them, but yeah, I'm sure that you can find them.
I'm sure we'll be able to find them online. And there's just a general comment regarding the portable induction units that you can pick them up on Facebook Marketplace for as low as $30 to $40. So if you want to give it a try, that might be the first place to look.
I think you can just about pick up anything on Facebook Marketplace for $30, can't you?
You're totally right. You mentioned running a heat pump hot water system off solar. I assume they can be timed somehow to heat during the day.
Yes. Look, a lot of them are programmable to time, and some of them are easier to program than others. So if you're keen to do that, I would definitely find out, look at the model that you're looking at and find out, okay, how do I control it? Some of them are controlled like with a phone app. Other ones have like a little panel that you've got to, it's like programming a video recorder. So, find ones that's easy to control. That's the key. There's some companies that make things, what are they called? There's companies that make things called solar diverters or hot water diverters that basically is an extra device, and it measures when you've got unused solar generation, and then it sends electricity to the heat pump. Some people use them and love them and swear by them, but my view has always been it's a whole lot of extra cost, and it's a whole other thing that can go wrong. And if you just time it to heat up during the day, most of the time that's going to heat up off your solar. Some of the time it's going to heat up from mains electricity. They're so efficient, it doesn't really matter that much. I don't think, I think one of my colleagues at Renew did a bit of rough modeling on the cost effectiveness of the diverters and sort of said, look, it's not really worth it because, the amount that you might accidentally spend a bit more if you sometimes run your heat pump off mains electricity is inconsequential compared to the saving that you make most of the rest of the time. So, yeah.
We actually installed one on a council pavilion that
Yep.
just had an electric hot water unit with a resistive element.
Yeah.
So we just wanted to divert excess solar into that element.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was pretty costly for what it did, and I think it was over $1,000 just for that unit.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, I've got a question here about bathroom heaters.
Oh, yeah.
3-in-1 infrared heater tubes should be sealed from the roof space and ducted.
Generally, if you're, I'm actually not quite sure. You're talking about like the heat lamp ones. I'm not sure if it means something different.
It might be
I
3-in-1. I think is the
panel.
heat lamp
Yeah.
one.
Get
It's got the
infrared panel
fan and the
heaters, and
light.
you can get those 3-in-1 with the heat lamps. Look, bathrooms is a good one. I'm glad that you mentioned it because I sometimes forget to mention. Obviously, if they've got the fan in them, it is always good. It is good to duct them, especially if you don't have much ceiling space. If you've got a lot of space inside the ceiling, you don't really need to worry about ducting. It's good to have the control. You can get ones with controllable flaps that open when the fan's on and close when not. And you need special ones when they've got the heat lamps because of the heat issue. It's always good to, block off basically holes between the living space and the roof space as much as you can. But it's usually, you can't always block off 100%. But those are good heating for, those type of heaters are good for bathrooms. People often ask about in-floor heating for bathrooms. And people really like, walking on the tiles and they're warm under their feet. But they do take quite a while to heat up and then quite a while to cool down. So you might you have to run it for like an hour to just have a 5-minute shower. And even if that's run by a heat pump, that's a lot of wasted energy. Whereas if you use like those heat lamps or even the old fashioned strip radiators in the bathroom, they're actually perfect for bathrooms. Sure, they're not efficient. They're like 100% efficient. It's energy in pretty much equals energy out with those types of heaters. But you're normally only using them for 5 minutes. It's not that much. And the good thing about them is that, like, the reverse cycle air conditioners and the your in-floor heating and your radiators, they all heat the air in the room, right? They make the whole room warm. But those strip heaters and heat lamps, they just heat your body. You need way less heat to keep your body warm if the heat's focusing on your body than trying to do the whole room. And that's exactly what you want in the bathroom. You don't want the fan because movement air makes you cold when you're wet. A heat lamp or a strip radiator that's aimed at your body for the 5 minutes while getting dry, that's actually, in terms of the amount of energy that you use for the heat that you need, that's actually the most efficient way to do it, even though the heaters themselves are not that efficient because you just use them for a short amount of time. So that's good for that. And then, in terms of those ceiling mounted things, there's some rules around ceiling penetrations now with the building code and that, and stuff that's compliant with the code should be fine.
Okay, thank you for that. I've got a question here. As a renter, I have a gas heater in the lounge room, an electric panel heater in the hallway, and 2 portable oil panel heaters. Which one is more cost effective and less emissions to use? I don't need to heat bedroom, only lounge kitchen area.
Yeah, look, I'm a renter too. I feel your pain. I've got a gas ducted heating system that heats my house really nice. Costs me thousands of dollars a year. Look, in that case, those resistive electric heaters, and they're all, they're different types, the oil heaters, the panel heaters, but they're all resistive electric. They're all 100% efficient. They will end up being more expensive to heat than your gas heater, most likely. So that's just a reality of your situation. Those little sort of resistive electric heaters, they're right in the right circumstances, like the bathroom example I gave. It's just heating right on you. The other good example for, say, the panel heaters or the little fan heaters is you might be sitting at a desk if you're working from home, say, and you might get a bit cold in your room, and a little heater under the desk that just sort of warms up your legs a bit, that you run for an hour or two, once or twice during the day. That might be the most efficient way to keep yourself warm while you're working, rather than trying to heat the whole house with, your gas heater or something. So, or even your reverse cycle air conditioner. So it's all about, you know, what you're doing with the heat. Are you heating your body? Are you heating the room? But in your situation, you know, those resistive heaters, they're terrible at heating up whole rooms, especially if your house is not well insulated or is drafty. The gas heater is probably going to be more effective, and you can probably test it out. You can test if you can do a bit of complicated maths a bit, you can test it out by, you know, running the heater for a week and, you know, and measuring and just recording the numbers on the gas meter and figure out how much gas it used and look at your bill, work out the cost. And in a similar week, you know, run the electric heaters and see how that costs, and then you can figure it out for yourself. But I would guess the gas heater will be more efficient. And when I was looking over the cost data before doing this tonight, you know, the resistive heaters are the most expensive and the most emissions compared to gas heaters. And then the reverse cycle, you know, heat pump sort of heaters are the cheap ones. That's the order. So probably the gas heater.
Okay, good advice. Is this a question about any advice for off-grid living?
Now, I skipped over the off-grid dot point on the slide because I understand this is mainly metropolitan. Yeah, are we? But yeah, look, off-grid is actually one of those special cases. If you're completely off-grid, then you probably have limited electrical capacity. And a lot of off-grid people, when they might have diesel generators as backup, that's pretty common. But often off-grid people will use bottled gas for one or two loads, maybe heating or hot water, to take the load off the electrical system. It depends. It depends on how big an electrical system they've got, how much storage they have, how much backup generation they have, how many solar panels they have. People often will, like, you know, depending on their overnight energy needs, for example, they might use the solar to heat up hot water, electric hot water during the day, and then just maybe use bottled gas for some heating, or wood fires people often use in off-grid situations if they're out of town. It really depends a bit. I mean, off-grid is very specialist. It depends so much on, you know, how much solar access there is, how big the house is, what your energy needs are. If you're on a rural sort of property, you might have other energy needs. If you've got, you know, equipment that you might use, like say mechanical, you know, mechanical equipment, or, you know, welding or stuff like pottery or something, you know, then that also can be big electrical burns. So it really depends a lot. But we do find that for off-grid, sometimes our electric's not the best because you need a few backup energy supplies because of the variability.
I remember when in a past life when we were selling these type of systems, and for off-grid users, it was really popular to use wood heaters, but with a wet back installed on the back of
That's
it,
right.
so
Yeah.
they can heat hot water, as well as keep the house warm,
Yeah.
and do your cooking all in one. So that was one way, if you've got access to wood, that is. But
And that's what you find with off-grid. People who are off-grid get very creative and organized about how they use energy. One of my former colleagues at Renew grew up in an off-grid house somewhere in Central Victoria. And, like, you know, for them, it was completely normal to have, you know, times without electricity and to, you know, do certain activities at certain times because that's when electricity was available. And, you know, that's what people, you know, when you're off-grid, you want to be off-grid, you make those sort of compromises and adjustments to your lifestyle to make it work. Yeah.
yeah, I'm just a little bit mindful that we're approaching time. So I'll just ask one more question regarding rebates.
Yep.
Does the hot water rebate have an end date? Should we be looking to replace even if current gas is still working fine?
Good question. I'm not, I don't know. I mean, it probably it's going to end at some time, I guess. I don't know. As far as I know, it's not about to end. Some of the programs, when they were announced, had specific end dates, and the solar and the hot water one haven't. So I don't think so. I suspect not for a while, because the Victorian government's got a whole sort of policy roadmap that's around people moving off gas and becoming more all electric. So I think they'll keep rebates for that will support people shifting off gas to electric. And I actually think they might get higher, but I don't know. That don't take my word for it. I'm just guessing. I don't know if that's true. It's just my sort of gut feeling. I think they'll be around for a while. In terms of changing before it breaks down, well, you know, it's hard to say. Like, you know, you've invested, you know, you've got economic value still in the thing. If you feel it's in it, partly it's up to you. Like, if you feel like you've got the resources now to do it and you want to do it, and you want to start saving money on your bills going forward, because you will if you get off gas, then it might be fine to do it. And look, some people take out working gas appliances and then sell them secondhand to help finance the move. And they're like, well, it's still got life in it. Someone else can use the life, and there's always people for whom buying a secondhand appliance is important for them to be able to do that. So, that's okay. So that might be one way. The thing with hot water in particular, though, is, people usually wait until it breaks down, and then it's just a bit too late. We should have done it, a month ago, and you don't know when it's going to break down. So keep an eye on how old it is. If it's getting pretty old, gas hot water systems, look, they can be 20 years old and still working okay, but between 12 to 20 years is probably the expected lifetime. And I think their official lifetime is 10 or 15 years. I think 15 years probably. So if it's getting close to that, then it's like, well, it's still working, but maybe now is the time. And then the advantage of doing that is that you can choose what model you want. You can wait until it's available. You can find the right tradesperson to install it. You can, decide if you want it in a different location and find out how much it will cost to move the pipes. And you can do all that sort of thinking that you might do with a major expense and not have to suddenly do it all in, 2 days when you just want a warm shower. So yeah, that wasn't really a yes or a no, but that's just some more things to think about to decide.
It's good to have a think about these sorts of things and make that call for yourself, because everyone's use case is a little bit different. So
absolutely.
I think we'll end the questions there and let you off the hook. But I just wanted to say thank you once again, Dean, for a really informative webinar today. I can see some of the comments that have been coming through, and people have really enjoyed the information that you've provided today. So thank you. And just as a final point, I'd just like to say that if people are interested in the upcoming webinars, to check your local council web pages to see what's on and the dates for those. And please feel free to sign up, because I'm sure there's going to be a lot more interesting information coming our way.
And could I add one more thing as well? Renew is also putting together a Getting Off Gas toolkit that's going to be released about mid-year. So keep your eye out for that. That'll include the sort of information that we've talked about here and probably other more detailed information as well. I'm sure that we'll send it with the councils that we've been working with on these webinars, because that'll be like the concentrated reference book for all this sort of stuff. So yeah, keep an eye out for that. Oh, someone found the name of the plates for induction cooktops: induction hob converter plates.
There we go. We've come full circle.
That's right. The perfect place finish. So it takes a village, right? Westies are the besties.
We'll end it there. And thank you, everyone who's still online, for joining us this evening. And look forward to providing more of these interesting webinars in the future.